The Lost Kings, Part 5. Dorias snorted, and Valan felt the magic roll from her hands and sink into his skin. Warmth spread from where her palms rested against his shirt, driving out the cold. Her attention, however, remained on the dragon. Also, it's rude to try and shove your way into someone else's head. The dragon's eyebrows rose. I was not shoving. You weren't asking either, she pointed out. Usually I don't have to, Brel answered, but Dorea hadn't finished. She waved a hand at his human form. And what is this? She demanded. You're surely not going to try and pass yourself off as human. Brel gave her a tight smile and indicated the passage opening out from the rear of the cave. No, but my true form will not fit, and I thought I might need to carry your brother. Nice thought, since you're the reason he'd need carrying, she scolded. So it's a good thing we rescued you, the dragon replied. Dorea looked Valen over, then, apparently satisfied with his recovery, she rounded on Brel. For once she seemed lost for words, so the dragon pressed his advantage. For which you don't seem particularly grateful, he added. Valen watched the colour sweep up the back of Dorea's neck. Thank you, she said shortly, then indicated the opening. I take it we have some distance to go? Brel inclined his head and pushed off the wall. We do, he agreed, leading the way into the passage. A few twists and turns later, and they came to a set of roughly carved stairs and a door. Stay here, Brel ordered at the top. I will not abandon you. Strange words, Valen thought, watching the dragon descend. Brel raised a hand and knocked a staccato pattern. The floor opened beneath Valen and Dorea's feet, sending them plunging down a steeply inclined chute. Dorea cursed, and Valen gave a startled shout. A moment later, a shadow darkened the opening above them. Clear the bottom when you reach it, the dragon instructed. I have no desire to crush either of you. As if you would, Dorea snarled back, then glanced nervously over her shoulder. I'd watch where I was going, were I you, Brel suggested. Dorea turned quickly around, and Valen breathed an internal sigh of relief. The last time he'd seen that look on his sister's face, one of the older boys had gone out a first-floor window. The healers had been called, and Dorea had been set to repairing the vegetable patch in which the boy had landed. As far as she'd be concerned, it had been worth it. Valen had waited until the boy was out of the healer's care before he'd made his feelings clear, and been given a thorough hiding for his trouble. He, too, had thought it worth it. The boy had left his sister and the other girls well alone after that. The chute ended, and Dorea had both feet on the floor, propelling her out of the way before Valen landed behind her. He followed her lead, hearing the thud of the dragon's arrival seconds later. Brel brushed past them. This way. They followed him from the small chamber at the chute's end, Valen noting the dark iron bands reinforcing the heavy oak door he used to exit. Someone's not taking any chances, he thought. He doubted many would discover the secret of the door upstairs, and was willing to bet that door was a facade set flush against a stone-walled dead end. More corridors followed, but Valen was aware of movement around them. Light flickered in rooms beyond wall slits that gave their occupants a view into the corridor, and shadows sometimes blocked their warm glow. Doors opened cautiously behind them. Valen glanced back, but the corridor remained empty, at least for the first 200 yards. When footsteps sounded quietly behind them, he looked back again. He wasn't happy to see 4 warriors stalking after them. Don't mind them, Brel instructed. They're only seeing to our safety. Your safety, perhaps, Dorea countered, and Valen silently agreed. He glanced back once more, relieved to see the warriors had come no closer, that as well armed as they were, they showed no sign of intending to use their weapons. It's not as if they could reach us before we harmed him, Valen thought, turning his attention to Brel's fast-moving back. An arm slid around his shoulders and the point of a dagger pressed into his side. You were saying, a soft voice snarled in his ear. Valen froze. The dagger tip nudged him. I said nothing, he managed. And isn't it rude to mind walk someone without their knowledge? Laughter echoed inside his skull. Not when we're guarding our liege, the voice replied. Lysander. The single word was both acknowledgement and admonishment, and the dagger left Valen's side. The arm remained long enough to give his shoulders a quick squeeze, and then his sudden companion dropped back to join the others. This time, Valan resisted the urge to look back, and they reached a large meeting room with no further incident. A broad stone table took up the room's centre. It was edged by benches, and Brel went to stand at one end. Valan and Dorea followed him, coming to stand to one side of the table. The four warriors filed in after them, splitting so that two stood opposite and two came to stand a little behind them. Valan turned his head. I'd rather you didn't. Neither of them blinked. One dropped his hand to his sword hilt, and the other folded his arms across his chest and raised an eyebrow. Yeah, right, Valan huffed and looked back at Brel. You said you had a plan? I don't care if he has a plan, Dorea interrupted before Brel could reply. What he'd better have is an explanation. Movement drew Valen's attention, and he moved to intercept the guard's strike before it could land. Enough, Brel snapped. While I know I do not need to explain myself, these are my guests, and the children of those we seek. That drew the warrior's attention. My lord? Brel indicated Valan. King Tregaran's son. A second gesture drew their attention to Dorea. King Elanadine's daughter. The guard who tried to strike Dorea sank to his knees. Forgive me, my lady. You will kneel to no one. That order rapped out from the end of the hall. King, princess, prince, it continued as Valan looked toward its source. No one. You understand? We're hired by one man only, and to him alone do we hold fealty. To him and each other. The new arrival had hawkish features and a narrow tan gold face. His dark hair gleamed like polished onyx, and his eyes shone a deep midnight blue. He bowed to Brel. My lord, forgive my delay. I had to ensure your back trail was clear. His back trail? Dorea challenged. The newcomer gave her a look of distaste. Even the air holds traces of one's passing. That was news to Valan, but he kept his surprise to himself. Not well enough, it seemed, as the newcomer took the thought from his face. You will learn as much, Hunter, should you survive to maturity. Valan glanced uncertainly from the newcomer to Brel, then kept his eyes on the dragon's face. Now that we're all here, Brel began, we have much to discuss and little time. I know where the kings are being kept, and we need to reach them before the White Mountains commence the ceremony without their get. That's not their way, the newcomer said. That depends on whether the gods are prepared to risk losing the birds they have in hand, as opposed to imposing their will through what they have, Brel replied. And the White Mountains gods are growing impatient. How impatient? The man asked sharply. Dawn, Brel replied. I'd ask how you knew that, but I know who is absent, the newcomer replied. Valan thought he caught warning in the man's tones, but didn't know enough to understand who he meant or why it made the hawk-faced newcomer so angry. She is the best we have, Brel replied, and I would not risk her without cause. Agreed, the newcomer answered. Please, go on. In the mountains to the east, there is a temple shrine to Scalen. Dorea stifled a gasp, but Brel continued. The White Mountains have been using it as an observatory over this area for a decade or more. Hence why they placed a home to Scalen there, the newcomer concluded. Brel dipped his head in acknowledgement and continued. There is a small valley tucked behind it, walled on all sides and linked to the caverns and cellars below the temple itself. She has seen our kings being held there. The colour in the newcomer's face leached to a pale yellow. She didn't enter. No, Ravandar, no, Brel hastened to assure him. She observed them from the peaks beyond. The White Mountains don't know every inch of the terrain. Unusual for them, Ravandar replied. Agreed, Brel replied, but the mountain from which she observes is one they leave alone. Do you know why? I have my suspicions, Brel answered, and she will be safe. If you are correct, Ravindar warned. Is it enough to say that I believe I'm right, but don't wish to say it aloud? Brel asked. You're afraid? Ravindar asked. Brel's face reddened. There are reasons I don't wish to speak that name. Ravindar's mouth quirked with brief amusement, and he made a rolling motion with his hand. Go on. As I said, the valley is open to the sky. No, my lord, Ravindar cut him off. It's not safe. Scalan is the god of sight and future, Dorea broke in, and everyone looked at her. Catching Brel's gaze, she continued. The White Mountains are purists. My father is, I assume, a forest elf. She gestured at Valan. His father is a Northman like your preferred form. Valan gaped at her. How did you? Dorea rolled her eyes. Give it a rest, Val. Temper like yours, one that only really showed when I practiced certain kinds of magic. Why do you think I took my studies to the highest room in the orphanage and practiced while you were asleep or out? You did? Men, so oblivious. She looked to Brel. Purification ceremony, right? Brel dipped his chin, his eyes narrowing, but Dorea hadn't finished. So, we're talking a succession gone wrong and a power struggle within the tribe, she continued, which means we need to change the mind of a god if we're to ever live a life unhunted. The chances of that are slim, Brel told her. But they exist, Dorea argued, giving Valen a look asking for help. Valen realized he was looking at her like she'd grown a second head, and his mouth was hanging open. What? She challenged. I study politics along with my wizardry. Both are about manipulation, so they're a good match. Valen closed his mouth with a snap. Why would that work? He asked, and she glared at him. Because the kings are being held where they can be sacrificed to the challenger's god. If we can offer the gods something more, like the very things the challenger needs to consolidate their hold with, he managed, and her frown deepened. If it doesn't work, we can always blow the temple up, she told him, and returned her attention to the dragon. Right? Blowing it up would bring them down on you like an avalanche, Brel warned. They're doing that anyway, Dorea retorted, so we win either way. There really is no reasoning with her when she's like this, Valen thought. Then we'd better hear both plans and see what they look like in combination, Ravindar answered. We'll need it if we're to run them in conjunction. Just as long as we don't put anyone on the explosives who's likely to blow it up regardless, one of the other warriors said.